So when we're talking about the cable Y raise, I'll show you in a second with the cables, but I just want to demonstrate first without them. What we're looking to do is raise up and out, finishing in this Y position, right? Like you're back in college hitting that YMCA again, good times. And so we're looking to finish in this Y position, not this T position, not this kind of like I position directly overhead, somewhere in the middle in that Y position right here. And the big mistake that I see a lot of people make with this is they forget that that movement is supposed to happen out in front of the body. And so as you see when I grab the cables, that movement is going to happen out in front of my body, and then I'm pulling back. And so what you're doing is you're first pressing out and away, and then you're finishing with a pull back, right? And so it's out and away, and then finish with this back vector where you're pulling kind of back this way behind your body. And so it's going to start with the hands together, and that's going to be kind of the end of the range of motion at the bottom. I want you to bring the hands together, and then it's going to finish as high and as far back as you can bring your arms. And so I'll show you what it looks like with the cables, and I'll show you a seated version. It's essentially the exact same thing, but you can sit. And so set your cables up to the bottom. I want you to use a pair of D handles. These are just these little single handles here. You're going to grab them like this, crisscross. Your hands are going to touch, and you're going to raise up and back. Hands are going to touch. Now, what you might find is that as you try and get to the point where your hands touch, the cables tend to click with each other. Now, you can do one of two things. What I was doing there is I was just letting one of my arms go a little bit forward to kind of navigate around that. And so one of my arms would be just a little bit out in front. And strategically, they're not clicking together here. But what you could do is you can actually take the carabiner off, and you can, instead of attaching it into the circle right here, I'll hopefully be zoomed in at this point, you can take the carabiner and clip it to the wire. And what that'll do is it'll bring the whole handle closer together so there's not as much slack. And then when you grab the handles, you'll have a little bit more room before the hands touch. And if at the end of the day, the clicking of the cables is really bothering you, you can just stop before that happens. It's really not a big deal. If your reps kind of stop right here where the cables touch, and it looks like this, you're going to do just fine. It's really not a big deal. Now, how far away should you stand from the cables? When your arms are perpendicular to the torso, I want them in line with the cables. Let me repeat that. When your arms are perpendicular to the torso, which is about halfway up the movement, I want it to be in line with the cables. And so it's going to be a little bit hard to tell from there. But I want to take one little step back so that when I'm about here, I'm perfectly in line with the cables. If I step back here, I'm behind the cables when I'm halfway up. If I stand too far forward, I'm in front of them. And so essentially you'll take one step back, and then as you raise up, as you cross by this middle point in the rep, you're going to be in line with the cables there. Now, if you really wanted to do this seated, you absolutely could. You could slide a bench in here, and you could do something very similarly seated like this. So whether you sit or you stand, I'm not too concerned. Obviously, standing's a little bit easier just because you don't have to bring a bench over, but sitting often does provide a little bit more stability. It's a little bit easier. You don't have to stabilize as much. But at the end of the day, both are totally fine. What I want you to focus on is making sure you're finishing in a Y position, not a T position, and making sure that that movement happens out in front of the body, and then you pull back, and then just making sure you're going low enough and you're standing one step back. If you're doing all of those things, you're doing great. Realistically, it's that top position that I care about most. That's a position we don't get into quite often. It is a position that's unique to the Y raise, and so that is one of the main things that we're doing. So really make sure that when you get to the top, you're fighting for that squeeze backwards.